What if the peace you were living in was built on a lie, one so dark it echoed through space and summoned a silent ship from humanity's forgotten past? No threats, no warnings, just a presence watching, waiting, and remembering. This is not just a story of reckoning, it's a story of choice. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and show your support with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's jump into the story. The sky over Valor was quiet, painted with soft colors from the twin suns rising behind the distant silver hills. Birds flew gently between tall crystal towers, and morning light shimmered on floating garden paths where children played and merchants opened their stalls. Everything was peaceful. Everything was normal. But far above the calm, in the dark stretch of space just beyond the planet's view, something had arrived. It did not speak. It did not shine. It gave no signal or warning. It simply hovered in silence, blacker than the space around it, watching. In the central Skywatch Tower, Naven Oru sipped his usual morning tea, seated in front of a wide array of glowing monitors. As the head of planetary observation, he had watched these skies for over 20 years. Cargo ships, visiting diplomats, weather patterns, he knew them all by heart. He was just beginning to log the day's first patrol cycle when the first screen blinked out, then another, and another. One by one, the monitoring panels went dark, as if the sky itself had shut down. Naven frowned, tapping the keys. No alerts, no system errors, just blankness. Beside him, his trainee Mick and Devra froze mid-step, eyes locked on his wristpad. "Sir," he whispered, his voice shaky. "The satellites, they're gone." Naven blinked. "Offline?" Mikan shook his head. "No, sir. Not just offline. They've disappeared, like they were erased." Naven stood quickly, a cold feeling crawling up his back. That wasn't possible. Valor had never faced an attack. Their world was neutral, protected by old peace treaties signed generations ago. They had no enemies, no wars. So why had the sky gone silent? Back at the defense center, calls came in from spaceports and signal towers. Pilots couldn't connect. Ships returning from patrol were suddenly lost. The main communications grid failed without so much as a flicker. Governor Lenora Shar, a woman known for her steady leadership, was pulled into an emergency council meeting before sunrise. No one had answers, only questions. What had caused this? Was it a natural event? A malfunction? Or something else? As officials argued over the situation, panic began to ripple through the streets of Valor's capital. With no digital signals working, messages spread by word of mouth, passed in hushed voices and hurried steps. People looked up into the clear morning sky, unaware of what waited just beyond it, still silent, still watching. Then, without warning, one of the ancient analog receivers at the old observatory crackled to life. It hadn't been used in over 100 years. Mikan had kept it running out of habit, more for training than anything else. Now, it was the only device picking up anything at all. A single message came through, short and strange, 6 words in a forgotten human language. "We remember what was done." Naven stared at the screen. The script was old, from before humans withdrew from galactic affairs. For decades, Earth had stayed quiet, keeping to its own systems after suffering heavy losses in the outer wars. Valor had no known connection to those conflicts. They had always claimed peace. But now, something was different. Up in orbit, hidden from view, a massive ship shifted slightly in the darkness. Its surface reflected no light. It had no markings, no engines visible, no signal being broadcast. But if someone could have seen the underside, they might have noticed a faint inscription barely etched into the moving metal. 4 words: Dawn of Ember, Earth Fleet. Inside the ship, Commander Jalen Cree stood in silence, watching the calm planet below. His hands were behind his back. His face was calm, but his eyes told a different story, one of pain, loss, and something heavier than anger. The voice of the ship's AI, Mira 9, spoke softly beside him. Planetary systems disabled. Response none. Orbital defenses inactive. Jalen nodded slowly. They don't know we're here yet. Mira paused, then added, They will. Jalen closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the old recordings. He remembered the last call for help Earth had sent to Valor generations ago. A call that had never been answered. A call that had been intercepted. He remembered the refugee ships that never made it, the silence that followed, the betrayal buried in treaties and covered by peace. On the planet's surface, Governor Lenora stood on the edge of the main council balcony, staring up into a sky that still looked peaceful, but she felt it, a weight pressing down. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. She turned to her advisors, voice quiet but firm. This ship, whoever they are, they didn't come here to talk. They came to remind. And they were right. Because, as the morning sun reached its peak, casting golden light over the gardens of Valor, the shadow above remained, still, dark and watching. It had not fired. It had not spoken. But its silence screamed louder than any fleet. Something old had returned. Something human. And it had not forgotten. The silence didn't fade. It deepened. By the next day, the skies over Valor were still, calm, but the people below were not. Rumors moved faster than light. Schools closed early. Markets emptied. The usual buzz of city life had gone quiet, replaced by hurried steps, lowered voices, and nervous glances upward. And above it all, that black ship remained in orbit, still unmoving, still watching. The mystery of its presence now gripped the entire world like a fist. Inside the central archives, where history was kept under layers of security and time, Tazra Viln walked carefully through the tall shelves of data spires. She wasn't a soldier or a leader. She was an archivist, someone who had spent her life cataloging dusty treaties and forgotten speeches. She had never seen real fear before, but today, it was in every corner of the city. And she knew why. Something about the ship. Something about its silence felt like a question no one wanted to answer, but questions were all Tazra dealt in, and something about that old message, "We remember what was done," had stayed with her. She followed the trail of that message through older and older logs until she reached a locked file buried beneath layers of outdated code. She had never seen it before. No one had. It wasn't listed in any index, just a dusty entry labeled Incident 973A. When she opened it, her hands trembled. What she found was not just data, it was memory. A memory her world had chosen to forget. Decades ago, during one of the most dangerous points of the Outer System Wars, Earth had reached out to several neutral worlds for help. Valor was one of them. At the time, Earth's refugee fleets were scattered and under attack. Their ships, filled with civilians, needed safe passage through Valor's territory. The request was simple: allow them through, nothing more. But the records showed a darker choice. Valor had accepted Earth's transmission, promised to help, then forwarded that very message to an enemy empire in exchange for advanced shielding technology. Within days, those human ships were destroyed. Over 10,000 people, families, scientists, children lost in space. No survivors, no records. Just a silent decision wrapped in politics and buried by time. Tazra backed away from the terminal, heart racing. Her hands covered her mouth, as the weight of that truth settled in her bones. They had betrayed Earth, not in war but in silence. Not by accident, but by choice. Meanwhile, above the planet, aboard the Dawn of Ember, Commander Jalen Cree reviewed the very same files. Mira 9 had retrieved them from Earth's war records, archived but never deleted. The betrayal had never been forgotten, just left to wait. Jalen watched old footage of Earth's pleas, their desperate messages, and the final transmissions from the doomed fleet. Some were just audio. calm voices asking for help that never came. Others were worse, cut-off screams, flickering images of fire, final goodbyes. Jalen clenched his jaw and turned off the screen. They lied to themselves, he said quietly. But we never did. Back on the surface, Tazra raced to the Planetary Council with the data crystal in hand. She demanded to speak to Governor Lenora. At first, the guards hesitated, but her urgency convinced them. Inside the tall marble chamber, council members argued loudly, unsure whether to prepare for war or send a signal of peace. Tazra walked straight to the center of the room and placed the crystal on the table. "This is what they remember," she said, her voice echoing through the silence that followed. Lenora inserted the crystal into the display. The footage appeared instantly. Earth's call for help, Valor's promise to protect, then the proof of betrayal. The entire room fell quiet. Even the most proud and stubborn counselors could not speak. Their world had been built on a foundation of peace. But that peace had a cost, and now it had returned to demand an answer. That night, as Valor's people went to sleep under a sky still haunted by the black ship, the ship made its first move. It didn't fire a weapon. It didn't activate its engines. Instead, every citizen of Valor heard a voice, not through speakers but in their minds. Calm, deep, and unmistakably human, it said only this: "We asked for help. You sold our lives. You erased the truth, but we did not forget." Across the planet, people woke up sweating. Some cried. Others stared blankly at their walls. Everyone had heard it. No name was spoken. No threat was given. But the message carried a weight heavier than fear. It was truth. And truth, once seen, could not be hidden again. In her private quarters, Lenora stared out her window, eyes fixed on the unmoving shadow above her world. She had inherited a planet proud of its peace, but now she saw what it had cost. In her heart, she felt a question rising. Could they ever make it right? Or had the time for answers already passed? Far above, in the quiet bridge of the human ship, Mira whispered to Jalen, "They know now." Jalen nodded, never looking away from the planet. "Yes," he said. "Now they choose what kind of world they want to be." The silence from the human ship hovered like a storm cloud that refused to break. For days it remained above Valor, unmoving, unblinking, and completely quiet. But the silence was doing more than any weapon ever could. It was spreading fear. At first, the people of Valor had hoped this was just a misunderstanding, that the ship would eventually speak. But as the hours stretched into days, something deeper began to grow. Fear turned to doubt. Doubt turned to suspicion. And suspicion began to open doors that had been sealed shut for decades. Within the central archives, the once forgotten chamber had now become the most visited place on the planet. Tasra Viln, a quiet archivist who had spent years buried in old texts no one cared about, was suddenly surrounded by politicians, military officers, and historians desperate for answers. The sealed records, cracked open after decades, revealed a truth too terrible to ignore. During one of Earth's darkest hours, when their people were fleeing a brutal war, Valor's leaders had been given a choice: offer shelter or stay silent. They chose silence. And worse, they had secretly sold the location of Earth's refugee fleet to an enemy alliance in exchange for new technology and protection. It had been recorded in the old war files as a strategic diplomatic exchange. But to the humans, it had been betrayal. Tazra stood before the documents, his hands shaking as he scanned the signatures of long-dead officials. He had never imagined this peaceful world, known for its floating gardens and open skies, had built its safety on someone else's suffering. But now that secret had returned, alive in the form of a silent black ship watching from above. On the streets, the public response fractured fast. Some people, led by a young voice named Nero Jasan, began holding open gatherings calling for truth and forgiveness. He spoke to crowds not with anger but with sorrow. We must own what was done even if we were not the ones who did it. Peace is not built by hiding the past, it's built by facing it. His message reached far, especially among the younger generations who believed in unity over silence. But not everyone agreed. Colonel Darian Husk, a decorated military leader with influence deep in the defense structure, had begun to build a quiet response plan. He argued that Earth's silence was not peace, it was threat. He gathered officers loyal to him, opened old supply vaults, and began quietly activating Project Hollow Sun, a defense initiative long thought abandoned. It was meant for planetary protection against deep space threats. But under Darren's guidance, it was being prepared for a strike. "We cannot wait," he told his officers. "We cannot let them decide the time and place. If they're here for judgment, then we show them we're not afraid." His voice was firm. His plan was clear. Strike first, and Valor might survive. Wait, and it might not. Lara Ken, a top pilot and former student of Darren, had been handpicked to lead one of the new strike teams. But her hands trembled when she received her flight orders. She had seen the old footage. She had read the reports. And deep inside, she didn't believe this ship came to destroy. She believed it came because no one ever apologized. No one had remembered. Until now. Late at night, with only one terminal still online, Lara broke protocol and sent a coded message to the human ship using an old diplomatic channel, one that had not been used since before the war. The message was simple. Not all of us want war. Some of us are still listening. She didn't expect a reply. She didn't need one. She just wanted someone up there to know that not all of Valor had forgotten. In orbit, Commander Jalen Cree received the message. Mira 9 confirmed its origin. He read it twice, his face unchanged, but his voice slightly softer when he spoke. At least someone still remembers how to speak. The activation of the planet's defense systems hadn't gone unnoticed. He had seen the energy buildup. He knew weapons were coming online. He also knew that if Valor fired first, Earth's response would be swift and final. He didn't want that. But he had his orders. If they attacked, he would not hold back. Down on the surface, Governor Lenora Shar knew time was slipping away. She had seen the military movements. She had heard whispers of Darren's plans. And she understood one brutal truth. Valor could not afford to be divided when judgment hung above their skies. So she made a bold choice. Without waiting for the Council's permission, she initiated a global broadcast. The message appeared on every screen, every station, every street corner. Lenora stood alone before the camera. No guards, no backdrop. Only the seal of Valor behind her. "To every citizen of this world," she said, "we must speak the truth. Decades ago, our leaders made a decision that cost innocent lives. They buried it. But Earth did not. Now, their silence has become ours. But it does not have to stay that way." Her voice didn't rise in anger. It settled like a weight on the heart. "Some among us prepare for war out of fear. But fear is not leadership. Fear will not save us. If we want peace, we must reach for it now." As the broadcast ended, the planet held its breath. In bunkers, in warships, in homes and markets, the people of Valor faced a choice. The pressure of fear was growing, but so was the power of truth. And above them, the black ship watched, waiting. The skies over Valor were no longer calm. From the black ship above to the panic on the streets below, every heart on the planet beat with the same question. What happens now? The truth was out. The betrayal had been uncovered. The past, once buried under peace treaties and polished speeches, now hung in the air like a storm about to break. Across the capital, citizens stood in clusters staring at the last image left by Governor Lenora's broadcast, a burning human ship, and a message once ignored. Everyone had seen it, and no one could unsee it. In the underground command bunker, Colonel Darren Husk stood over a console displaying weapon status across the planet. Project Hollow Sun was armed. The deep sky strike systems were charged and locked on the human vessel. "They're watching us," Darren said to his second in command, his tone sharp and certain. If we hesitate, we look weak. If we look weak, we're already finished. But something was changing in the room. A quiet doubt. Engineers shifted in place. Technicians hesitated to follow final launch procedures. The silence from above had begun to work its way into the minds of those below, and some of them were no longer sure this was the right move. Above on the black ship, Commander Jalen Kree stood with arms folded, his eyes locked on Valor's defense grid. The energy spikes were clear. Their weapons were hot. Mira 9, the AI beside him, read off the statistics in a flat tone. Probability of hostile action 79%. Time to impact if launched 16 seconds. Earth Command requests confirmation. Stand by for Omega. Jalen said nothing. He simply stared. Then a faint beep interrupted the quiet. A new signal had appeared. An unauthorized transmission, coming not from a council tower or a military node, but from a civilian source. Mira analyzed it quickly and confirmed. It was real, and it was honest. The face of Nero Jessen appeared on the screen. He wasn't a leader or a general. He was just a young man standing in the middle of a crowd, holding a recording device, his voice steady. To Earth, some of us remember, we do not want war. We want truth. We want to make things right. Please wait. Jalen watched the message play twice. Then he nodded. They're choosing. Mira responded. Omega sequence paused. For the first time in days, a sense of stillness returned to the bridge. On the surface, Governor Lenora moved fast. She knew Darren would not stop unless someone forced him to. With help from loyal officers and a direct order from the High Court, she stormed the underground facility. When she entered, Darren was seconds away from giving the launch order. Don't, she said firmly. The people have seen the truth. This is not your decision anymore. Darren stared at her, and for a moment it looked like he might resist. But then, the sound of protest echoed from above. The people had chosen, and they were no longer behind him. Elsewhere, Lara Ken, the pilot who had leaked the first message to the human ship, watched from the skyport as strike drones were ordered, back into hangars. Her hands were still shaking. She had trained for war, prepared for battle. But today, her mission was peace. And somehow, that felt heavier. At the Grand Archive, Tazra Viln continued to sort through old files, now joined by historians and reporters alike. What had once been hidden was now being shared openly. Evidence of the deal made by Valor's leaders, records of Earth's unanswered calls, and testimonies from those who had known the truth but said nothing. We thought silence kept us safe, Tazra said quietly to a journalist. But silence only delayed the storm. Back aboard the ship, Mira reported calmly. Planetary systems powering down. No signs of further aggression. Message from Earth Command received. Decision on hold. Jalen stood still for a long time. Then he turned to the console and opened a channel, not to Valor's council, not to their leaders, but to every citizen. His voice came through every speaker, screen, and radio across the planet. This is Commander Jalen Kree of the Earth vessel Dawn of Ember. We did not come for revenge. We came for remembrance. You forgot, but we did not. Now you've seen what was hidden. You've remembered. That is enough, for now. He paused, his voice steady. There are those among you who tried to bury the truth. There are others who stood to face it. The future of your world is your choice, but Earth will always remember who stood in silence and who chose to speak. The message ended. No further instructions. No threats. Only silence once again. But this time it felt different. Heavier, yes, but also honest. Slowly the black ship began to rise. Its engines did not roar. Its movements made no sound. It simply drifted upward, higher and higher, until it disappeared into the stars. Valor did not cheer. There were no celebrations. Only quiet. People walked the streets in silence, their heads lowered, their thoughts heavy. But for the first time in a long while, their silence came not from fear but from reflection. Inside the old university courtyard, Students had already begun building a small stone marker. No government had ordered it. No council had planned it. It was just something they knew needed to be done. A place to remember what had happened and to promise that it would not happen again. And far above, in the quiet of space, Earth watched. They did not forget. But for now, they had chosen to wait.